The first time I saw the fresh asphalt cutting across my farmland, I thought it was a joke. I'd just come back from a 4-month contract job in Kansas, welding on wind turbines. My 80-acre property in Georgia had been in my family since my granddad bought it after the war. I'd been leasing out most of the pasture to a neighbor for grazing, but the front 10 acres, untouched. That was the heart of it. My granddad's old barn, a pair of pecan trees, and the slope that overlooked the town. It was mine. So imagine my reaction pulling up and seeing painted lines, a fresh concrete curb, and a giant green sign that read, HOA guest parking daily fee $8, no overnight stays. The kicker: I don't even live in the subdivision. I slammed the truck into park and just stared. My name's Ronan Reddick, by the way. 43, ex-army, welder, and lifelong hater of people who think clipboards give them power. Which brings us to Florence Granger, president of the Willow Creek HOA and self-proclaimed community guardian. She showed up exactly 3 minutes after I stepped onto my own land. "Excuse me, sir," she barked from her golf cart like she was patrolling a war zone. "This is private HOA property. No trespassing." I turned slowly. She had the look frosted bob, designer sunglasses, and a laminated name badge like she was running for mayor of a neighborhood nobody liked. "I own this land," I said flatly. Florence scoffed. "That's impossible. This is part of Willow Creek's common use expansion zone. We had it surveyed and rezoned months ago." I narrowed my eyes. "Funny, because I've got the deed in my safe and the taxes still come to me." "Want to explain who paved over my pasture?" She looked down at her clipboard like it held the secrets of the universe. "Well, the previous HOA board submitted a land annexation request and received no opposition, so the county approved the variance. It's all very technical." "Except nobody told me," I said. Florence crossed her arms. "Mr. Reddick, if you had read the posted notices or attended any of our public meetings, I don't live in Willow Creek." She blinked. "Never have. Never will." Florence's jaw tightened like she'd bitten into a lemon. "Well, that's unfortunate, because the parking lot is already operational, and HOA funds covered the construction, so we have to recoup the costs." I looked around. There were already about 20 cars parked under community event banners. Some guy was unloading folding chairs. A teenager in a safety vest was collecting cash at a pop-up booth. Florence smiled, trying to shift gears. "Since you're here, perhaps you'd like to rent a booth at our weekend artisan market. We're always looking for authentic local flavor." That's when I made my decision. I didn't scream, didn't threaten, I just said, "Sure, Florence. Let's see how this plays out." And for the next few weeks, I let them charge fees, run events, and expand the parking lot. I let them dig their own hole. The county clerk's office was a squat brick building tucked between a bait shop and a shuttered diner. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and coffee that had been left on a burner too long. I waited until the receptionist finished her phone call before stepping up to the counter. "I need a copy of the parcel survey for Tract 71B, east of State Route 112, I said. The woman squinted at her screen. "That's near Willow Creek, isn't it?" "Next to it," I corrected. "Not part of it." She clicked through a few pages, then frowned. "Looks like that was updated recently. You're the listed owner on the deed, but there's an overlay filed by the Willow Creek HOA claiming a right of use through a zoning variance. That's odd." I leaned on the counter. "How did they get a variance without my signature?" She hesitated. "Only way that happens is if someone submitted a signed affidavit of consent." "Can I get a copy of that affidavit?" She glanced over her shoulder, then lowered her voice. "You'll need to file a formal records request, but off the record. If someone forged your signature, that's criminal." I figured. I left with my request filed and a scanned copy of the parcel overlay on a thumb drive. On it was a dated annexation map showing a swath of my front acreage designated as Community Access Zone B. The signature at the bottom. Not mine. The fake looked decent, but it was missing the hitch in my R and the tail on the D. A signature only a welder with a busted knuckle on his writing hand would make. I didn't go straight to the sheriff. Not yet. I needed more. Back on my property, I parked behind the barn and walked the length of the new pavement. Most of the cars were gone. It was a Tuesday, but a few stragglers remained. A woman in scrubs wrestled a stroller out of her trunk, while a man in a polo shirt adjusted a sandwich board advertising Willow Creek Evening Yoga. I stopped just short of the booth where a teenage girl sat under a pop-up tent counting bills. "Who collects the money?" I asked casually. She looked up. I just work the booth. Mrs. Granger picks it up every night. She says it goes into the Neighborhood Improvement Fund." "Does that fund have a bank account?" She blinked. "I don't know, I just get paid in cash." I nodded and walked off. The next day, I headed to the county zoning office and requested a review of the variance approval process. I brought two things with me: a notarized copy of my original deed and a handwriting sample comparison certified by a document examiner I'd hired off a legal referral site. The zoning officer, a man named Lane who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, flipped through the file in growing disbelief. "This shouldn't have gone through," he muttered. "There's no adjacent parcel merger, no hearing minutes end. This affidavit doesn't match your records at all. So it's fraud," I said. He rubbed his forehead. "It looks that way. I'll have to escalate this to the county attorney." "Do that." I spent the next week gathering more. I bought a trail camera and mounted it in the barn loft, pointed toward the parking lot. Every night, Florence rolled up in her little golf cart and collected the cash box from the booth. She never had a ledger, no receipts, just a big canvas bag. 3 nights in, I got footage of her carrying the bag into her garage and returning empty-handed. On the 4th, she had a friend with her. They stood in her driveway under a security light, counting stacks of bills. That's when I called a buddy of mine, Carlos, a retired state trooper who now worked as an investigator for the district attorney's office. "I've got forgery, misappropriation of funds, and probable tax evasion," I said. "You want to see the footage?" He showed up that night with a portable scanner and a notepad. After watching the videos and comparing the documents, he nodded slowly. "I can get a warrant, but you'll need to be ready for this to go public. HOAs have a way of making noise. Let them." 2 days later, Florence's house was raided. Sheriff's deputies rolled in just after dawn, seizing file boxes, her laptop, and the cash box from under her bed. Turns out the Neighborhood Improvement Fund was a personal slush stash. The HOA never saw a dime. At the same time, Lane from zoning issued a formal revocation of the variance. The county put up a fence around the lot pending further investigation. I installed my own signs, 2 metal ones welded to steel posts sunk 4 feet deep into concrete. "Private property trespassers will be prosecuted the next day." Florence tried to confront me. She wasn't in her golf cart. She walked up the gravel drive in high heels, her face drawn tight. "You've made a serious mistake," she hissed. "No," I said, "you did. You forged a legal document and pocketed community money. You're lucky I'm not suing you personally. I was building something for the neighborhood. You were building a lie." She turned and stormed off, nearly twisting her ankle in the gravel. With the lot shut down and Florence facing charges, the HOA tried damage control. They held an emergency board meeting, this time in a folding chair circle on someone's lawn. Word had spread fast, and half the neighborhood showed up, including some very angry residents who'd paid hundreds in parking fees and market booth rentals. I watched from the edge of my property, arms crossed. One man, a landscaper named Mitch, stood up and demanded to know where the money had gone. Another woman, who'd run a candle stand at the market, asked if they'd get refunds. The board had no answers. A week later, the remaining members resigned. The county reclaimed oversight of the HOA's charter pending reformation. Florence was booked on felony fraud and released on bond. The DA was considering additional charges once they completed the financial audit. And me, I planted a row of cedar saplings where the asphalt had been ripped up. I left the pecan trees standing but built a small fence around them, just enough to make the point. Every now and then, someone from Willow Creek walks their dog past my fence line and pauses to read the new sign I posted next to the drive. This land is not for sale. Never was. Never will be. People nod respectfully now. No more golf carts. No more flyers taped to my gate. Just the quiet sound of owning what's yours and making sure no one ever tries to take it again. By the time the indictment came down, Florence's name was on the evening news. I watched it from the back room of my friend's welding shop, leaning against a workbench while the local anchor read off charges like she was listing groceries. Wire fraud, forgery, misuse of public funds. The county's investigation dug deeper than anyone expected. Apparently, that parking lot scheme wasn't Florence's first rodeo, it was just the one that got caught in the spotlight. The DA's office had found 2 more forged documents. One was a fake easement agreement supposedly signed by a retired couple who'd moved to Florida. The other was a fraudulent vendor contract that funneled HOA funds into a shell company registered under Florence's maiden name. The woman wasn't just greedy, she was deliberate. I didn't celebrate. Not exactly. But I did return to the property that evening with a fresh stack of treated lumber and a rented auger. I spent the next 12 hours building a perimeter fence along the old lot line. Not the kind you find in suburbia, either this was cattle grade, cross-braced, and topped with barbed wire. I wasn't taking any more chances. Around midday, I spotted a silver sedan creeping along the gravel shoulder of the nearby county road. The driver, a man in his 50s with a Bluetooth headset, stepped out and approached the fence with a folder tucked under one arm. "You Ronan Reddick?" he asked, giving the fence an appraising look. "Depends who's asking." "Dennis Halford. I'm with the state licensing board. I'm auditing Willow Creek's contractor permits." "About time someone did," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. He flipped open the folder and held up a page. "You recognize this name, Garrison Aggregate Solutions?" "Nope. They're listed as the paving contractor for the Willow Creek expansion, but the business license is invalid. We ran the name through our records and found no active permits, no tax filings, and no physical address. So it's fake. Looks like it. We think it was a front to launder the HOA funds. Whoever poured that asphalt wasn't licensed, and whatever money changed hands didn't go through proper channels." I nodded toward the barn. "I've got footage of the paving crew, no marked trucks, no safety signage. One guy had a T-shirt that said Max Moving on it." "That's useful. If you can send it to my office, we'll forward it to the Attorney General." I handed him a flash drive. He left with a promise to follow up, and I returned to tightening fence wire. By sunset, the lot was fully enclosed, no more access, no more excuses. The next day, I got a call from a woman named Natalie Reyes. She introduced herself as a paralegal representing a group of Willow Creek homeowners who were filing a civil suit against the former HOA board. She wanted to meet. We sat on the tailgate of her car at the edge of the pasture, her heels sinking slightly into the grass while she scrolled through a tablet. 8 plaintiffs so far, she said. All former residents who paid into the so-called improvement fund. Some of them contributed over $3,000 each. "Let me guess," I said. "No accounting records. None that weren't handwritten on notebook paper." And those were conveniently destroyed in a filing cabinet leaked the day after Florence's arrest. "Tell your clients I'll testify," I said. "I've got the footage, the documents, and the notarized deed, whatever you need." She looked up from the tablet. "Honestly, we were half expecting you to be bitter. Most people don't want to get involved beyond their own fence line." "I don't like bullies," I said. "Especially not ones who hide behind fake rules and fine print." As she drove off, a rusted pickup rolled up the drive. It was Mitch the landscaper who'd spoken out at the emergency HOA meeting. He stepped out and pulled a folded map from his back pocket. "You hear about the green belt?" he asked. "No, what about it?" "That whole strip behind my property and the next 3 houses." HOA told us for years it was protected land. Turns out Florence filed paperwork to sell it to a developer last spring. Quiet deal. No notices. I took the map. Sure enough, a dotted red line marked a proposed access road that would cut through the greenbelt and connect to the old parking lot. They were gonna run traffic through your backyard, I said. Yup, and pocket the sale profits. I let out a low whistle. She really thought nobody would check. Mitch shook his head. She picked the wrong neighborhood. We might be quiet, but we remember everything. The developer deal was the last straw for a lot of folks. Once it hit the local paper, the backlash came fast. Yard signs started popping up all over Willow Creek, hand-painted ones that said things like HOA free zone and no more Florence. By the end of the week, the county had suspended the neighborhood's HOA charter entirely, not just the board, everything. No legal authority to collect dues, enforce rules, or act on behalf of residents. The entire structure was deemed compromised. The charter could only be reinstated after a full audit, a special election, and a supermajority vote from residents. And judging by the looks of things, they weren't in a forgiving mood. I thought that was the end of it. Then the letters started arriving. The first was from a private law firm trying to negotiate a mutual resolution on behalf of Florence. They offered to settle the property dispute amicably if I agreed not to pursue civil damages. I tossed it into the burn barrel. The second came with a court date. Florence was suing me for interference with community planning operations and loss of potential HOA revenue. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. My lawyer, a woman named Kendra who once worked as a federal prosecutor, filed a motion to dismiss and countersued for trespassing, vandalism, and fraud. As part of discovery, we submitted the full video archive, the forged affidavit, and the contractor audit. Florence never showed up to the first hearing. Her lawyer tried to argue that the HOA had reasonable belief of land entitlement based on administrative oversight. The judge, a no-nonsense Vietnam vet named Judge Abernathy, leaned forward and asked one question. So you didn't think it was odd that no one ever saw a signed contract from the property owner? The lawyer stammered. Abernathy wasn't having it. He ruled in our favor on every count, awarded punitive damages, ordered Florence to pay court costs, referred the case to the state bar for potential disbarment proceedings against her counsel. I walked out of that courthouse and didn't look back home, the pasture's healing. The asphalt's gone, ground tilled and seeded. The cedar saplings are starting to take root, and the barn's got a new coat of red paint. I get the occasional visitor folks dropping off pies, asking if I'd consider running for the new HOA board once it's reformed. I always give the same answer. No thanks. I already got my hands full making sure nobody else tries to pave over what doesn't belong to them. The fence stays up. The cameras stay on, and the sign at the gate got an update, welded in bold steel letters. You took your shot. Now take the lesson. Florence pled guilty. It happened quietly, a negotiated deal between her lawyer and the district attorney in exchange for a reduced sentence. No trial, no cameras, no jury. Just a sealed courtroom and a stack of evidence that made fighting a losing battle. She accepted a 5-year suspended sentence, 2 years probation, and over $75,000 in restitution to the HOA and individual residents. But the real fallout was still rolling downhill. The county's audit of Willow Creek uncovered a web of irregularities that stretched further than Florence. 3 former board members had taken vendor kickbacks during prior landscaping contracts. One of them, a man named Curtis Delaney, had been quietly hiring his own nephew's crew to overcharge for tree removal and split the excess. Another had been falsifying resident complaints to trigger fines, which the HOA kept in cash, never reported, never logged. That same week, I got a call from a woman named Lisa Tran, a junior associate from the state attorney general's office. She wanted to meet in person. We sat outside at a picnic table behind the diner near the highway. She was young, sharp, and carried a yellow legal pad already filled with margin notes. "We're building a case file for what's likely going to be a racketeering investigation," she said without preamble. The HOA functioned more like a private cartel than a neighborhood association. "You're a key witness," I leaned back. "They ever pull this on other neighborhoods?" "We're looking into 5 others in the region. Same law firm filed their charters. Same zoning agent approved their variances. Same general pattern: sudden fees, forged approvals, inflated improvement projects." She flipped the page. "We believe Florence and her crew were operating as a coordinated enterprise to exploit HOA authority for personal enrichment." I raised an eyebrow. "RICO," she nodded. "That's where we're heading." I gave her everything, not just the footage and documents, but the contact info for every neighbor who'd come forward. Mitch, Natalie, even the teenager who ran the parking booth, all of them had stories. All of them were ready to testify. The Attorney General's office didn't waste time. Within 2 weeks, subpoenas went out to the developers who'd bought land from Willow Creek. One contractor was arrested for fraud. The zoning agent Lane had worked with resigned under investigation. The law firm that filed the fraudulent annexation paperwork faced a full ethics review. But the part that hit hardest, the money trail. An accountant working with the DA's office traced nearly $200,000 in unreported funds through dummy accounts, phony vendor names, and charitable donation shells. The money had been moved through a series of small transactions designed to avoid scrutiny. They'd used HOA dues to bankroll personal vacations, luxury furniture, and even a down payment on a lakeside property in Tennessee. Lisa called me again after the indictments dropped. "This might be the largest case of HOA corruption in state history," she said. "You started something big." I didn't say anything, just let that sit in the air. Meanwhile, the residents of Willow Creek held a vote not to appoint a new board, but to dissolve the HOA entirely. With the county's blessing and over 80% support, they terminated the charter. What remained was just a neighborhood, free from bureaucratic control. I drove through the subdivision the day after the final vote. The signs were down. The gatehouse was empty. Kids rode bikes without someone tailing them in a golf cart. It looked like a place where people lived, not a place where they were managed. Mitch waved me down on his front lawn. "Hey," he said, walking over, "you see the petition?" "What petition?" "We're turning the old Greenbelt into a co-op garden. No fees, no board. Just neighbors planting vegetables and sharing the harvest." I looked past him, toward the stretch of land that Florence once tried to sell behind everyone's backs. A group of residents were already out there, digging beds, laying mulch, laughing. "Looks like it's already started," I said. Back at my place, the pasture was greener than it had been in years. The cedar saplings were holding strong, and the fence had become a landmark of sorts. People slowed down as they passed. Some stopped to take pictures. One morning, I even found a small wooden sign someone had hung beside the gate: "Justice grew here." I left it. A few weeks later, I got a certified letter from the state court. It contained a final restitution check not from Florence, but from a liquidation fund created through the seizure of her assets. The judge had ordered her lake house sold, along with a second vehicle and some jewelry appraised during the investigation. The check covered the cost of the damage to my land, plus interest. I deposited it into a separate account and used part of it to install a well and solar pump near the barn. The rest, I set aside for the veterans welding program I'd been mentoring part-time. Nothing flashy. Just a way to make sure something good came out of it all. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the cicadas tuned up, Natalie stopped by with a brown envelope. "The civil suit settled," she said. "We won. Everyone's getting compensation." And the judge issued a permanent injunction against Florence having any role in HOA governance ever again. "Good," I said. "She lost that right a long time ago. She's also banned from serving on any nonprofit board in the state. They want to make sure she doesn't try this somewhere else." I nodded. She won't. People are watching now, Natalie hesitated. You know, if you ever wanted to help start something better, some kind of watchdog group, people would listen to you. I didn't answer right away. I looked out past the barn, past the ridge where the city lights began to flicker on in the distance. Maybe, I said. But right now, I'm just glad the land's quiet. She left me the folder anyway. I still haven't opened it. The last piece came from an unexpected place. The teenager who used to run the parking booth dropped by one afternoon. Her name was Tessa. She wore a faded college hoodie and handed me a small envelope. It's not much, she said, but my dad and I wanted to thank you. Inside was a hand-drawn card. A sketch of the barn, the fence, and the sign. At the bottom, she'd written, "One person can stop 100 lies. Thanks for being that person." I kept the card. Not because I needed to be thanked, but because it reminded me of something my grandfather once said when we fixed a broken fence line together, years ago. Land don't argue with you. It either trusts you or it doesn't. And once it does, it'll fight for you when you need it. Turns out he was right, and now that trust, it's permanent.